boundaries really help to empower us, where we can assess moment by moment, what is our tolerance for something? Is this okay with me? It's not a power play where we're trying to gain power over this person, or yelling or things like that, or I won't allow you to speak with me this way and things like that. It's really important that when boundaries are about demanding respect, you can't demand respect in a disrespectful way. So now that we know why it's important to set boundaries, what are the steps necessary in order to create these boundaries to lead to healthier relationships, inshallah? So the first thing is to figure out why. Why do you want to set boundaries? And I know in everything that I'm talking about, I talk about like setting a positive intention, but it really is so important, and it really shifts our mindset when we set a positive intention. And so in order to be able to set a healthy boundary, people really struggle with the idea of how to reconcile maintaining bonds of kinship with creating boundaries. But both complement each other. And that's the key here. They both can coincide with each other in a very positive way, because healthy family relationships can't be maintained without healthy boundaries. Right? And we saw the example of boundaries from the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We saw an example of healthy boundaries in the Quran, right? And so the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says to us, and this is a very beautiful hadith in terms of setting our intentions correctly. He tells us, "Shall I not inform you of something more excellent in degree than fasting, prayer, and sadaqah, in giving charity?" And the people, of course, replied, yes, who wouldn't want to know what's better than these three amazing things? And the Prophet ﷺ responded, "It is putting things right between people. And spoiling them is the shaver, meaning it's like destructive, if you spoil things between people." So our intention in setting boundaries is to put things right between people. Because if you think about the relationships where you wish you could set a boundary, are things healthy between you guys? Is the relationship where you want it to be? And the answer is typically no. Because if it was, you wouldn't need a boundary in place, right? And so you're trying to put things right between you because in the long run, if I don't set this boundary, it's going to end up destroying the relationship. And that's going to be really negative. So the intention is a beautiful one, right? So you make the intention as a form of putting things right between you and others, right? And creating boundaries is your responsibility first, because you can't control what another person chooses to do. So now how? How do I set a boundary? First thing is observe. Observe what really bothers you. What really gets under your skin? What makes you feel anxious? What makes you feel frustrated? What makes you feel hurt when it happens in a relationship? Once you know what's upsetting, then it tells you what's okay and what's not okay. And that's the key, right? And I'm going to give you examples in this talk in terms of how to set boundaries, right? So there are going to be several here. So the first is going to be let's say you're getting bombarded by messages from somebody, right? Like somebody, when they want to talk to you, they send you 40 messages in a row, and they call you 10 times in a row, right? Or being asked intrusive questions by someone, or feeling a lack of privacy in your personal space. Especially for those who live with in-laws, that's often a very a big concern, or with their own family, actually, right? Lack of that privacy in your personal space. Feeling drained of your time, right? That's also a boundary issue. Or being spoken to in a demeaning and disrespectful way, also boundary issues. So these are all examples, and there are so many more examples of boundary issues, right? But I want to just bring these up since they're pretty common. All right, next step after you've observed and you identify, okay, what makes me upset? What's bothering me? What gets under my skin? The next thing is to be clear. When you are conveying a boundary, right, it's really important to be clear about what's okay and what's not okay. A person can't cross a boundary if they don't know that it's a boundary. And it is your responsibility to share it with them. You can't be upset there are certain things that obviously across the board are naturally upsetting, right? But then there are other things that are particular to you, these are important things to you. You can't be upset with somebody if they don't even know that this is upsetting to you. It's not fair to them because you haven't even told them that this is not okay. So it's not fair to hold them responsible for something they don't know is not appropriate to you. Okay? And so being clear about the boundary. So here are some examples of what that looks like. So with the messages, It would be something like, I wasn't available when you first messaged me, but if there's something you wanted to talk about, then I'll be free in about an hour if that works for you, right? Set boundary around your time, right? If, somebody asks a really intrusive question, something that's like really, personal. Some people have no concept of that, right? And so you might say something like, oh, that's an interesting question, but, I'm not really comfortable answering that. It's a little too personal. Or you can say it in like a really superficial way, and you can detract from it, where you can just say something like, they ask a question and like, oh, you know what? Actually, before I forget, I wanted to ask you about something, right? That's setting a boundary too. It's not direct, but it's still setting a boundary where you're not responding. You don't need to be obligated to respond to a question that bothers you, right? Personal space. Can you please knock on my door before coming into my bedroom? Setting a boundary. If you feel drained of time, setting a boundary to create scheduled timings to spend time with this person. So sometimes there are people who make you feel drained, right? Who demand a lot from you. Schedule time with that person if that relationship is important to you, so that it doesn't spill over into the rest of your life, so that they can feel prioritized without you feeling burnt out, right? So letting them know, hey, I'm not available, at like, 10 p.m. is usually when I go to sleep. So it's hard for me to have like a long phone call at that time. But instead, like, why don't we make sure to get coffee? Like I have like about an hour between, work obligations from this time to this time. And you have that time with them, right?
Choosing your spouse, choosing to commit to them, and choosing to end the relationship if you need to. How can you navigate those decisions at every stage of your personal love story? That's what the Fiqh of Love is all about. It's your on-demand guide to the ins and outs of marriage, from the search to the nikah and everything beyond, so you can write your personal love story in light of the Quran and Sunnah as you navigate modern challenges. Join Sheikh Wali Basuni, Sister Sarah Sultan, and a panel of experts as they walk you through all the ins and outs of your love life in the light of the Sunnah. Start writing your love story today at almaghrib.online/love.
Now, when it comes to the disrespect piece, that one's a little bit different, right? Because it depends on a few different factors. If this isn't somebody that you're going to be interacting with very often, then you can stay silent, and you can say a good word, like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ encourages, like say a good word or remain silent, right? Because you're not seeing them often. But if this is somebody that you care about, if this is somebody that you see often, that is a part of your life, and like this is just somebody who you interact with on more than just a superficial level, then, keep in mind the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, where he says, a man utters a word pleasing to Allah without considering it of any significance, for which Allah exalts his ranks in Jannah. And another one speaks a word displeasing to Allah without considering it of any importance. And for this reason, he will sink down into hell. Right? So constantly remaining silent as somebody demeans you is not needed, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us that, O you who believe, do not let a people ridicule another people. You don't need to allow yourself to be ridiculed. It is okay to set a boundary for this. And then also, again, that intention shift. We see where the Rasul ﷺ tells us that somebody might say something good and not realize this is going to be a means of them going to Jannah. Somebody says something bad and they don't even realize that this is going to be a means of them being in the hellfire. If you care about this person, then you don't want their words to be a means of them going to the hellfire, right? So it's also not even about you sometimes. It's also for them, right? Like I'll tell you, it was really cute. My son the other day was telling me that, he had like a thing with a friend of his, and his friend, called him a mean name, and we were talking about ways to deal with it and everything. And I was like, well, you get hasanat from him every time he says something. So, you can, I use like the technique of like, you can say thank you for the hasanat and everything. And he was like, but you know what, Mama, I don't want him to go to the hellfire for saying these things. And so I think it's better if I tell him like, don't say those to me because I don't want you to be punished for this. And I was like, man, my son is so much better than me, mashallah. And it was really sweet, mashallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect him. But it's when you have that intention for somebody that you care about, right? Where you want them to be their best self too, then setting a boundary can actually help them as well as help you. And that's a really beautiful intention, right? So boundaries really help to empower us where we can assess moment by moment, what is our tolerance for something? Is this okay with me? It's not a power play where we're trying to gain power over this person or yelling or things like that, or I won't allow you to speak with me this way and things like that. It's really important that when boundaries are about demanding respect, you can't demand respect in a disrespectful way. And this is something that I think people struggle with boundaries. You can't demand respect in a disrespectful way, right? And so if you say something, right, like, it really hurts when I hear you use this word. So instead, like, why don't we have a discussion when you've cooled off? Like, let's take a break and I really think there's a lot of power behind saying something like, is everything okay? This isn't like you, right? Like, this isn't, this isn't like the way that our relationship normally is, or this isn't like you. Like, I see the way that you are as a person and everything. Why don't we both calm down and come and talk about this later, right? That again is setting a boundary. You don't have to, because you're still stopping them from saying these things to you and being disrespectful to you, right? And so, so all of these convey a way of preventing yourself from being mistreated, but also for the sake of the other person. And that's a boundary as well, right? And then in terms of the next step too, one thing is, so when you've established the boundary, it's not a magical thing, right? It doesn't then immediately fix everything. You have to still remind yourself about your intention behind this, because setting a boundary and sticking with a boundary is hard. Especially when patterns in families are established, it's very hard to stick with a boundary. So a lot of times we might feel some shame or guilt after we set a boundary with people that we love, and reminding yourself that this is a way that I'm protecting myself and the people that I love. This is a way that I'm trying to make things right between us, like the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam encouraged, is a beautiful reminder. And then also in terms of responsibility, of the how of setting boundaries, your actions are your responsibility, not another person's reactions. There will be people, no matter how nicely you set a boundary, who will react badly, right? But that's not your responsibility. And it can go different ways, right? Like sometimes people will respond really well, right? Where they'll be more respectful. And then there are other people who just won't, right? They won't like the change. It feels uncomfortable to change a dynamic. And your responsibility is just to communicate your boundary kindly and in a respectful way, even if it's hard, whether they follow through with it or not. And then the final step in that is to maintain consistency. And that's really hard too. A lot of times we can set a boundary, we get in the zone for it, but then we let it go. And people pick up on that, right? People realize that, well, this is, that this must not be so important to her if she's not consistent. This must not really mean a lot to him because he doesn't really care if now anymore, right? So maintaining that consistency. So when those text messages come in, right? And they come in one after the other, not responding right away in the way that you always used to, right? Because if we don't follow through, then we give that person permission to continue that healthy dynamic, right? And one of the beautiful things about relationships and one of the beautiful things about people, right, is that we can change. And so relationships can change, and so I can make small, consistent changes to get to a point that's healthier for everybody in the relationship, inshallah. And like the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam encourages us, he says that the best of deeds is that which is done consistently, even if it's small. So is there one small change, if you could imagine one thing changing in your relationship with somebody in your life, what would that one small change be? And what step can you take toward that in order to make it healthier, inshallah?
So one point about setting boundaries is when it is like your in-laws, the elders. So they have this feeling that it's their right. It's my right to ask intrusive questions. They don't find it intrusive to begin with, right? So at that point, what's the finer balance between being obedient, being respectful, keeping the ties of kinship, and yet having boundaries?
And that's a really excellent question, mashallah, and it's a very hard one, right? Because, every family situation is a little bit different. Everybody's reactions are a little bit different, right? And I think it's one of those things where you have to weigh the pros and cons, right? Is the discomfort I'm going to feel in responding to this question And the resentment that is going to build in my heart against my in-laws going to be more damaging or less damaging than their reaction to me trying to set a boundary, right? And so it's about, okay, is this something that is like really non-negotiable to me? Like it really bothers me and it's really hurtful to me because, it absolutely can be. And then having a little bit of like a conversation where it's like, I know that you don't mean this. I know this is your way of showing me love, right? You want to know a little bit about my life and things like that and everything. And so, and so you can also think about like, okay, I know this is that's the intention behind it. So what can you, and that's a little bit in the rest of this, the last part of this presentation about boundaries, is if they continue to be crossed, right? What is the need behind it? Is it like, okay, I want to know about my daughter-in-law's life, right? Like I want to be informed. I want to be a part of her life. I want to feel needed and everything. Is there another way that you can help satisfy that need for your mother-in-law or your father-in-law without them needing to ask those intrusive questions, right? So like it makes me wonder, like I wonder if like in a lot of joint family systems, some people live up, the couple lives upstairs and the in-laws live downstairs. So coming down and, saying, to mother-in-law, look, I'm making a cup of tea. Can I make you one? I wanted to just, talk to you, see how your day went and everything. And, doing that a little bit on, like for 15 minutes on a daily basis might fulfill that need, right? And those intrusive questions won't be quite as needed, And so sometimes it can be helpful to think about what's the alternative need? And is there a way that I can feel comfortable fulfilling that? The other example for that often comes up is with in-laws is in terms of kids and involvement with kids is like, okay, well, you should be doing this because this is the correct way to raise this child, right? That to me is always, I want to be involved in my grandchildren's life. I want to be needed and I want my opinion to be valued. Right? So what's the need? That's the need. Okay, so what are ways that we can make sure that she feels that? Okay, I can call her for advice on something that is a minor issue. That's not sensitive for me, right? Where I can just be like, okay, my son has a cold and everything. What was that remedy that you told me about? What do I have to boil on the stove and that will help him and everything? Can you tell me the recipe and let me write it down and so that they feel needed, right? And thinking of little things to allow that need to be fulfilled so that they don't have to push it in that particular way.